In the affluent suburb of Oakridge, just outside of Portland, Oregon, the Monroes were the picture of upper-middle-class success. Alan Monroe, 48, was a prominent cardiothoracic surgeon at Providence St. Vincent Medical Center. His wife, Veronica, 45, was a well-respected real estate agent known for selling multi-million-dollar properties in the area. Their daughter, Cassandra, had just started her freshman year at Stanford University. But from the outside, the Monroes seemed to have it all: a sprawling craftsman-style home in one of Oakridge's most desirable neighborhoods, luxury cars in the driveway, and a social calendar filled with charity galas and country club events. But beneath the polished veneer of their lives, cracks were beginning to form. Veronica Monroe, despite her professional success, found herself grappling with a growing sense of dissatisfaction. As she approached her mid-40s, she became increasingly aware of the passage of time. The reflection in the mirror each morning seemed a little less vibrant, a little more lined. Her marriage to Alan, once a source of comfort and stability, had grown stale. Their conversations, when they happened at all, revolved around schedules and household matters. It was into this atmosphere of quiet desperation that Jake Sanders entered Veronica's life. At 23, Jake was a recent college graduate working as a personal trainer at the exclusive Oakridge Country Club. With his chiseled physique, sun-kissed skin, and easy charm, Jake turned heads wherever he went. Veronica first encountered Jake during a charity tennis tournament at the club. As she struggled with her serve, Jake approached, offering to give her a few pointers. His strong hands on her arms, guiding her movements, sent a jolt of electricity through her that she hadn't felt in years. What started as innocent flirtation quickly evolved into something more intense. Veronica found herself spending more time at the club, scheduling private training sessions with Jake under the guise of improving her fitness. During these sessions, their conversations moved beyond exercise techniques to more personal matters. Jake listened attentively as Veronica spoke of her frustrations with her marriage and her fears of aging. And in turn, he shared his dreams of starting his own fitness brand and his struggles to make ends meet on a trainer's salary. As weeks turned into months, Veronica's infatuation with Jake grew into an all-consuming obsession. She began to revolve her entire life around their encounters, rearranging her schedule to maximize their time together. She showered Jake with expensive gifts, designer workout gear, a high-end smartwatch, even a used luxury car she claimed was just sitting in the garage. Jake, initially flattered by Veronica's attention and grateful for her generosity, began to feel overwhelmed by the intensity of her feelings. He enjoyed their physical relationship and the perks that came with it, but he was acutely aware of the vast difference in their ages and life situations. Although as Veronica's demands on his time and attention increased, Jake found himself pulling back, trying to create some distance. But Veronica was not willing to let go so easily. When Jake mentioned his plans to attend a fitness convention in Las Vegas, Veronica immediately booked a suite at the Bellagio, insisting on accompanying him. But she told Alan she had a real estate conference, a lie that came far too easily after months of deception. The trip to Las Vegas proved to be a turning point in their relationship. Away from the constraints of Oakridge, Veronica's behavior became even more erratic. She insisted on accompanying Jake to every event at the convention, glaring at any woman who approached him. In their hotel suite, she alternated between passionate declarations of love and tearful recriminations when Jake suggested they slow things down. On their final night in Vegas, things came to a head. Jake, feeling suffocated by Veronica's constant presence, told her he was going out with some fellow trainers he'd met at the convention. Veronica flew into a jealous rage, accusing Jake of cheating on her and threatening to reveal their affair to everyone in Oakridge if he left. Frightened by her intensity, Jake tried to calm her down, but Veronica was beyond reason. In a fit of anger, she grabbed a heavy crystal vase from the hotel room desk and swung it at Jake's head. He managed to duck, but the vase shattered against the wall, sending shards of glass flying everywhere. Realizing the situation had spiraled out of control, Jake fled the suite, leaving Veronica sobbing amidst the broken glass. He spent the night in a fellow trainer's room, his mind reeling as he tried to figure out how to extricate himself from the mess he'd gotten into. The next morning, Jake returned to the suite to find Veronica calm and apologetic. She begged for his forgiveness, blaming her outburst on too much champagne and the stress of keeping their relationship a secret. Against his better judgment, Jake accepted her apology, hoping they could return to Oakridge and things would go back to normal. But normal was no longer possible. Once back home, Veronica's obsession with Jake only intensified. She began showing up unannounced at his apartment, calling him constantly, even following him when he went out with friends. But when Jake tried to break things off, Veronica threatened to tell his boss at the country club about their affair, knowing it would cost him his job. Trapped and increasingly desperate, Jake confided in his roommate, Tyler, about the situation. Tyler, concerned for his friend's well-being, urged Jake to go to the police. But Jake, ashamed of his involvement with a married woman and afraid of the potential consequences, refused. As summer turned to fall, Veronica's behavior became more and more erratic. She began neglecting her real estate business, canceling appointments, and missing important client meetings. Her appearance, once immaculate, grew disheveled. She lost weight rapidly, her designer clothes hanging loosely on her frame. Alan, initially too preoccupied with his own career to notice the changes in his wife, began to grow concerned. He tried to talk to Veronica about what was bothering her, but she brushed off his questions, growing defensive and angry when he pressed the issue. Things came to a head in late October. Jake, at his wits' end, finally gathered the courage to end things with Veronica once and for all. He asked her to meet him at a coffee shop in downtown Portland, hoping the public setting would prevent another scene like the one in Las Vegas. But Veronica, sensing what was coming, had no intention of letting Jake go without a fight. She arrived at the coffee shop in a state of high agitation, her eyes wild and her movements jerky. As soon as Jake told her it was over, she flew into a rage, screaming and throwing her hot coffee in his face. As other patrons looked on in shock, Veronica continued her tirade, revealing intimate details of their affair and accusing Jake of using her for her money. When the cafe owner tried to intervene, Veronica shoved him aside and ran out of the shop. But Jake, mortified and in pain from the coffee burns, quickly left as well. He returned to his apartment, his mind racing as he tried to figure out what to do next. He knew he couldn't go on like this, constantly living in fear of Veronica's next outburst. What Jake didn't know was that Veronica had followed him home. As he entered his apartment building, she slipped in behind him, her years of real estate work making it easy for her to blend in, as if she belonged there. Jake was in the bathroom, tending to his burns, when he heard a noise in the living room. Thinking it was Tyler returning home, he called out. But the figure that appeared in the bathroom doorway was Veronica, her face a mask of pain and fury. "How could you do this to me?" she screamed, advancing on Jake. "After everything I've done for you, everything I've given you." Jake, cornered in the small bathroom, tried to reason with her. "Veronica, please, this isn't healthy for either of us. We need to end this." But Veronica was beyond reason. In her hand, Jake saw the glint of metal. With horror, he realized she was holding a large kitchen knife she must have grabbed from his kitchen. "If I can't have you," Veronica snarled, "no one will." What happened next was a blur of violence and desperation. As Veronica lunged at Jake with the knife, he instinctively grabbed her wrist, trying to disarm her. They struggled, crashing into the shower stall, the knife between them. In the chaos of the moment, Jake's foot slipped on the wet tile. As he fell, he inadvertently pulled Veronica down with him. There was a sickening thud as Veronica's head struck the edge of the bathtub, followed by an eerie silence. Jake, his heart pounding, scrambled to his feet. Veronica lay motionless on the bathroom floor, blood pooling beneath her head. With shaking hands, Jake felt for a pulse, but found none. Veronica Monroe was dead. Panic set in as the reality of the situation hit Jake. He had just killed his married lover in his own bathroom. How could he possibly explain this? Who would believe it was an accident? In a state of shock and fear, Jake made a decision that would change the course of his life forever. Instead of calling the police, he decided to try to cover up Veronica's death. Over the next few hours, Jake's actions were driven by pure adrenaline and terror. He wrapped Veronica's body in his shower curtain and managed to drag it down to his car, thankful for the late hour and the fact that most of his neighbors were already asleep. Jake drove out of the city, his mind racing as he tried to come up with a plan. He eventually found himself on a deserted stretch of road near the Columbia River Gorge. There, in the dead of night, he dumped Veronica's body down a steep embankment, hoping it would be mistaken for a tragic hiking accident. Returning to his apartment, Jake spent the rest of the night cleaning. He scrubbed the bathroom until his hands were raw, threw away the blood-stained bath mat, and even repainted the walls to cover any missed spots. By the time the sun rose, there was no visible evidence of the tragedy that had occurred just hours before. The next day, Jake went to work as usual, forcing himself to act normal despite the turmoil inside him. He half expected the police to show up at any moment, but the day passed without incident. It wasn't until that evening that the news broke. Veronica Monroe, prominent real estate agent and wife of renowned surgeon Alan Monroe, had been reported missing. Her car had been found abandoned in a parking lot near some popular hiking trails in the Columbia River Gorge. As the days passed and the search for Veronica intensified, Jake found himself living in a constant state of fear and guilt. He watched the news obsessively, flinching every time Veronica's name was mentioned. He saw Alan Monroe on TV, pleading for information about his wife's whereabouts, and felt physically ill. A week after Veronica's disappearance, her body was discovered by a group of hikers. The police initially treated it as a tragic accident, theorizing that she had fallen while hiking alone. But as they dug deeper into Veronica's life, inconsistencies began to emerge. Friends and colleagues reported that Veronica had been acting strangely in the months leading up to her death. Her work performance had declined, and she had become increasingly secretive and erratic. Then there were the unexplained expenses, large cash withdrawals, purchases from high-end men's stores, a used luxury car that was nowhere to be found. As the investigation progressed, Jake's name eventually came up. A member of the country club staff remembered seeing Veronica and Jake together frequently, often in what seemed like intimate conversations. When questioned, Jake initially tried to downplay their relationship, claiming they were just friends. But under the intense scrutiny of the detectives, his story began to unravel. The final nail in the coffin came when Jake's roommate, Tyler, came forward with what he knew. Racked with guilt over not having done something sooner, Tyler told the police about Jake's affair with Veronica and the trouble he'd been having trying to end it. Armed with this new information, the police obtained a warrant to search Jake's apartment and car. Despite his best efforts to clean up, forensic experts were able to find traces of Veronica's blood in the bathroom. In Jake's car, they discovered fibers that matched the shower curtain Veronica's body had been wrapped in. Confronted with the mounting evidence against him, Jake finally broke down and confessed. He told the detectives everything: the affair, Veronica's increasing obsession, the confrontation in his bathroom that had led to her death. He insisted it had been an accident, that he had never meant to hurt Veronica, but acknowledged that his actions afterward were indefensible. The news of Jake's arrest and confession sent shockwaves through Oakridge. The sordid details of the affair between the young personal trainer and the prominent real estate agent became the subject of endless gossip and speculation. Alan Monroe, already devastated by the loss of his wife, now had to grapple with the knowledge of her infidelity and the circumstances of her death. Cassandra, returning home from Stanford, found her family and her childhood memories tainted by scandal. The trial of Jake Sanders began 6 months after Veronica's death. The courtroom was packed every day, with curious onlookers and media representatives jostling for seats. The case had captured the public's imagination, a salacious tale of forbidden passion and tragic consequences. The prosecution painted Jake as a calculating gold digger who had seduced an older, vulnerable woman for financial gain, then killed her when she became too much to handle. They emphasized the age difference between Jake and Veronica, her lavish gifts to him, and his attempts to cover up her death. Jake's defense team, on the other hand, portrayed him as a young man who had gotten in over his head. They argued that Veronica had been the aggressor in the relationship, using her wealth and status to manipulate Jake. They presented evidence of Veronica's erratic behavior and emotional instability, including testimony from her colleagues about her declining work performance and strange behavior in the months leading up to her death. The trial lasted for 3 weeks, with both sides presenting a parade of witnesses and experts. Jake himself took the stand, his testimony a mixture of remorse and self-justification. With always, he admitted to the affair and to hiding Veronica's death, but steadfastly maintained that her death had been an accident. As the trial neared its conclusion, the people of Oakridge and beyond waited with bated breath for the verdict. The case had raised complex questions about power dynamics in relationships, the nature of consent, and the lengths people will go to when trapped in untenable situations. Finally, after 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their decision. The courtroom fell silent as the foreman stood to deliver the verdict. On the charge of murder in the 2nd degree, we find the defendant, Jake Sanders, not guilty. A collective gasp went up from the gallery, followed by a burst of murmurs. But before the noise could grow, the foreman continued. But on the charge of manslaughter in the 1st degree, we find the defendant guilty. The judge called for order as the courtroom erupted into chaos. Jake stood motionless, his face pale as the reality of the verdict sank in. His defense team huddled around him, already discussing the possibility of an appeal. In the gallery, Alan Monroe sat with his head in his hands, his daughter Cassandra's arm around his shoulders. The verdict brought no real closure for them, no sense of justice served. Their lives had been irrevocably changed by Veronica's actions and her tragic death. As the courtroom finally quieted, the judge prepared to deliver the sentence. He looked sternly at Jake, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. Jake Sanders, you have been found guilty of manslaughter in the 1st degree, while the jury has determined that you did not intend to kill Veronica Monroe. Your actions following her death demonstrate a callous disregard for human life and a willingness to go to great lengths to avoid the consequences of your actions. The judge paused, his eyes sweeping the courtroom before continuing. Taking into account all factors presented during this trial, I hereby sentence you to 10 years in state prison. You will be eligible for parole after serving a minimum of 7 years. And as the sentence was pronounced, Jake's knees buckled. He was supported by his lawyers as the reality of spending the next decade of his life behind bars hit him. In that moment, the full weight of his actions, the lives he had destroyed, including his own, came crashing down upon him. The bailiff moved to escort Jake from the courtroom. As he was led away, he caught a final glimpse of Alan and Cassandra Monroe. The pain and anger in their eyes would haunt him for years to come. The case of Jake Sanders and Veronica Monroe would long be remembered in Oakridge and beyond. It served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of obsession, the complexities of power dynamics in relationships, and the far-reaching consequences of our actions. As for the Monroes, the end of the trial brought little comfort. They were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives, forever changed by Veronica's secrets and her tragic end. Alan threw himself into his work at the hospital, while Cassandra struggled to reconcile the mother she had known with the woman revealed during the trial. Jake Sanders began his sentence at the Oregon State Penitentiary, his youthful dreams of building a fitness empire replaced by the harsh reality of prison life. The once charismatic personal trainer now found himself navigating a world far removed from the luxurious country clubs and upscale gyms he had known. As the courtroom emptied and the media frenzy began to die down, the residents of Oakridge were left to grapple with the aftermath of the scandal that had rocked their community. The case had exposed the dark underbelly of their seemingly perfect suburb, forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths about infidelity, obsession, and the facades people maintain.